When my mother texted that the family was attending my sister's wedding and couldn't come to mine, I just replied, okay, and closed the laptop. No tears, no begging. A week later, while the chairs in Rhode Island sat empty, photos of me in silk at my $6 million Tuscany villa hit the family network. They thought I would endure it, like always. But this time, I set a long table under string lights and made them look at the truth. My name is Serenity. The text message that finalized everything arrived on a Tuesday, during the 3:30 p.m. lull when the afternoon sun hits my office window in a way that illuminates every particle of dust hanging in the air. I was reviewing quarterly shipping manifests, the scent of old paper and stale coffee in my nostrils. The phone vibrated, a crisp, demanding buzz on the polished mahogany of my desk. It was from my mother, Diana Sanchez. The family's priority is Sierra's wedding. Not, we're so sorry. Not, this is difficult. Not, how can we make this work? It was a statement of fact, a corporate decree, the family's priority. As if the family was a board of directors and a final vote had been cast. Sierra's wedding, the one she had booked for the exact same day as mine, was the priority. I stared at the screen, the blue light stinging my eyes. The words floated, detached from any real emotion, like a headline about a distant disaster. Priority, wedding, Sierra. I felt the familiar, cold stillness settle over me, the emotional equivalent of a circuit breaker flipping. There was no rage, no sudden sting of tears. That mechanism in me had been worn out years ago. There was only the quiet, hollow acceptance of a truth I had always known. My thumb moved with practiced precision. I took a screenshot. The small click echoed in the silence of my office. I cataloged it, filed it away in a digital folder that lived only in my head. A folder labeled evidence. It was proof. Proof for me, for the moments in the future when I might be tempted to soften, to doubt, to misremember the facts. Proof that I had not imagined this, that this was the reality. Then I locked the phone and placed it face down on the desk. The vibration was silenced. The message was delivered. The decision was made, though they didn't know it yet. My gaze lifted from the desk and drifted, unfocused, until it landed on a memory. The family photo on the mantel at my parents' house. It was the centerpiece of their living room, a large, ornate, silver-plated frame. In it, Sierra stands dead center, beaming, her hair catching the light, a vibrant splash of red in her dress. My father, Hector, is on her right, his arm around her, laughing at something she just said. My mother, Diana, is on her left, her hand resting on Sierra's shoulder, a look of pure, unadulterated adoration on her face. The composition is perfect. I was there when it was taken. I was on the far left, next to my mother. I was wearing a blue dress. I remember the photographer, a friend of Sierra's, saying, "Okay, now a fun one," and Sierra pulling us all in. My arm was around my mother's waist. I was smiling. But in the silver frame on the mantel, I am gone. The frame, my mother had explained, was a specific, awkward size she'd found at an antique market. To make the photo fit, she'd had to make a choice. The composition just looked so much better this way. Serenity, she had said, not unkindly, as if explaining a simple matter of aesthetics. It was just too cluttered on the left. I was the clutter, the edge that had to be trimmed to make the picture perfect. That photo was the story of my life. I was the prologue that was skipped, the footnote that was ignored, the character written out of the final draft for the sake of a cleaner narrative. This was the rhythm of our family, set by my father, Hector Sanchez. The dinner table was his stage, and Sierra was his star. Every meal was a performance. "You'll never guess what Sierra did today," he would boom, his voice filling the room. He would then spin a mundane tale. Sierra getting a parking ticket, Sierra charming a barista, Sierra adopting a stray cat, into an epic saga of her wit, her compassion, her dazzling, chaotic spark. We would all listen, captivated. My mother nodding, my father's eyes shining with pride. My accomplishments were delivered in the silences, the small gaps between Sierra's applause. I won the state debate championship, Dad. That's great, mija, he would say, his eyes already drifting back to Sierra. Did you finish your homework? Now, Sierra, about that cat. I was named valedictorian. We're very proud. Pass the salt. I got the promotion, the one I've been working on for 2 years. Wonderful, Serenity, just wonderful. Sierra, honey, you look a little pale. Are you eating enough? I learned to stop talking. I learned to deliver my news in short, declarative sentences that required no follow-up. I learned to eat quietly. I learned that my role was to be the audience. My achievements were not stories. They were data points, and they were boring. They were stable, predictable, and required no dramatic intervention. I was the reliable, unseen infrastructure. Sierra was the grand, unpredictable, beautiful spectacle. My mother, Diana, was the one who codified this. She was the one who gave me the language for my own erasure. I was 15, perhaps 16. I had just won a significant academic scholarship to a summer program, one that would take me away for 8 weeks. I was ecstatic. I had worked for months on the application, hidden in my room, hoarding my ambition like a secret. That same week, Sierra had been caught skipping school and had failed her midterms. My mother didn't congratulate me. She sat me down in the living room, the one with the cropped photo, her hands clasped in her lap. Her expression was serious, almost pained. "Serenity," she began, her voice low. "We need to talk. I know you're happy about this summer thing." "It's a scholarship, Mom. It's a huge honor." Yes, it is. But you have to understand, you're lucky. Serenity. The word hung in the air between us, lucky. "You've always been lucky," she continued, gaining steam, as if this was a speech she had been rehearsing. "School, grades, it all just comes to you. You don't even have to try." I stared at her, my throat tightening. I thought of the all-nighters, the books I'd read until my eyes blurred, the social events I'd skipped, the panic I'd felt before every exam. "I do try, Mom. I work really hard." No, not like Sierra," she dismissed, waving a hand. "For Sierra, things are harder. She feels things more deeply. The world is a much more complicated place for her. But other things, the important things, they come so naturally to her. The charm, the way people are drawn to her. You're the smart one. Serenity, you're the lucky one. You have to be the one who understands." And there it was. My hard work was not work. It was luck. My discipline was not a virtue. It was a cold, easy, a simple A default setting. Sierra's failures were not failures. They were the complex, beautiful struggles of a deep, natural soul. My success was an accident. Her existence was an art form. Lucky became the thorn that pricked me every time I achieved something. Every A+, every promotion, every bonus. It was just my luck. It was the word they used to justify the imbalance. It was the reason I had to be the one to understand, to step aside, to make room, to trim myself from the frame. There was one voice, and only one, that ever cut through the narrative. My grandmother, Abuela Lucinda Morales. She was my mother's mother, but she was made of different material. She was quiet, she watched, and she missed nothing. She was in the kitchen with me one Thanksgiving. Years ago, I was methodically polishing the silver, disappearing into the repetitive task, the sounds of Sierra holding court in the next room washing over us. Abuela put her warm, papery hand over mine, stilling my motion. I looked up. Her dark eyes, bright as a bird's, were fixed on me. "Mija," she whispered, though we were alone. "No te dejes. Don't let them." She leaned in, her voice a fierce, secret hiss. "Don't let them teach you to disappear just so they can be comfortable." Her words were a shock, like a splash of cold water. She had seen it. She had seen the mechanism. She had seen them teaching me, and me learning, to shrink. She was the first person to ever name it, to acknowledge that my disappearing act was not my own choice, but a lesson being forced upon me. She planted a seed of defiance so deep, I wasn't even aware of it until it was ready to bloom. There was one other person, my cousin, Reina Delgado. While Abuela was my secret patron, Reina was my public ally. She was the only one who never forgot my birthday. The rest of the family, my parents, Sierra, were notoriously bad with dates that were not their own. My 21st birthday was a prime example. It was forgotten because Sierra had just gone through a terrible, dramatic breakup with a guitarist named Leo. The entire family's emotional resources were diverted to Operation Console Sierra. My day passed without a single call. At 10 p.m., there was a knock on my dorm room door. It was Reina, holding a single cupcake with a melted candle and a bottle of the cheapest tequila money could buy. "They suck," she announced, pushing past me and setting the tequila on my desk. "You don't. Happy birthday, Prima." We drank the tequila straight from the bottle and split the cupcake. Reina was my reality check. She was the one text message I could count on. The one person who saw me as a whole, separate entity, not as Sierra's sister, not as the lucky one, not as the family's designated adult, just serenity. The text message on my desk was the final punctuation on a lifetime of this. It was the predictable, inevitable conclusion. It had been preceded, of course, by a phone call a week prior. My mother, her voice high and wheedling. "Serenity, honey, we're all so excited for the weddings, but we've run into a little problem. We need to talk about the logistics." I almost laughed. I am the Chief Operating Officer of Everlane Logistics Corporation, a company I built from the ground up with 2 partners. My entire life is logistics. I manage a global supply chain, ocean freight, air cargo, and a fleet of over 300 trucks. I orchestrate the movement of millions of units of goods across continents. I do it with brutal, cold efficiency, and my mother, who could barely manage her own social calendar, wanted to talk to me about logistics. "What logistics, Mom?" I had asked, my voice flat. "Well, the dates." A nervous laugh. "Sierra is just so spontaneous. She and David are just so in love. They just booked it the same day. Can you believe the coincidence?" Yes. "So, we were thinking, you're always so wonderful, so flexible." There was that word, flexible, the word they used for submissive, the word they used when they wanted me to break. It's harder for Sierra," my mother continued, rushing to fill the silence. "Her venue is so strict, and her mother-in-law is flying in. It's a whole thing. Your father and I were just hoping you would be the one to understand. You're the one who can handle the logistics." I was the problem. I was the logistical snag that needed to be smoothed over. I was the one who was expected to dismantle my own life, my own wedding, my own joy, to accommodate Sierra's spontaneity. "I'll have to see, Mom," I said. "I'll look at the logistics." I lied. And now, the text, the final, formal declaration. The family's priority is Sierra's wedding. I stared at the black, silent screen of my locked phone. The sun had moved, and my office was now cast in shadow. The decision had been made for me, and in that, they had finally, truly, set me free. I turned back to my laptop. I closed the shipping manifests. I closed my email. I opened a new browser tab. The airline's website loaded, the bright orange logo familiar. My fingers typed in the destination code from memory, FLR, Florence. The villa was already waiting, my villa. Purchased 6 months ago. Not with family money, not with luck, but with my own. The Lucinda Trust, Abuela's gift, had been the seed, and my own work had been the harvest. It was my contingency plan, my fortress of solitude. Liam, my fiancé, the one person who saw me without the shadows of my family, already knew. "We get married where you feel peace, serenity," he had told me, his hands firm on my shoulders. even if it's just us and a witness. I am marrying you, not them. The flight details populated the screen. First class, one way. For now, my cursor hovered over the Confirm Purchase button. One click. The sound was tiny, almost imperceptible, but in the quiet of my office, it felt like a canyon splitting open, a definitive, irreversible severance. The confirmation page loaded. A deep, profound silence filled the room. It was the silence of a decision finally made, the silence of a long, heavy chain breaking, link by link, and falling to the floor, the silence of a new logistical plan. My plan. Clicking perfectly into place. The air in the Florence terminal was different. It wasn't just the humidity, or the faint, unfamiliar scent of diesel and espresso. It was the weight, the oppressive, damp chill of the Rhode Island spring I had left behind was gone, and with it, the physical burden I hadn't realized I was carrying. The drive south was a silent communion. I watched the landscape shift, the industrial edges of the city giving way to organized vineyards, and then, finally, to the wild, rolling expanse of the Val d'Orcia. My plane had descended through an atmosphere that seemed saturated with gold. It wasn't just sunlight, it was thicker, like honey, catching in the olive groves and turning the fields of wheat to fire. Now, in the car, that same light streamed through the window, warming my hands as they rested in my lap. The driver, a man who understood the value of silence, turned off the paved road onto a strada bianca, a white gravel path that kicked up a plume of pale dust behind us. We climbed for what felt like 10 minutes, winding through rows of silver-leafed olive trees, until the villa appeared. It wasn't a palace. It wasn't the ostentatious, glass-walled modernism my parents favored. It was a creature of the earth, built from honey-colored tufa stone. It seemed to have risen from the hill itself, anchored by time, impervious to drama. It was solid, permanent. A man was waiting on the broad stone terrace. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a face that held the same dignified, weathered texture as the villa itself. This was Signor Rinaldi, the custode, the keeper of the property. He didn't rush forward to take my bags. He simply waited, hands clasped, offering a short, respectful nod as I stepped out of the car. "Signora Sanchez," he said. His voice was gravelly, his English precise. "Signor Rinaldi, it's beautiful." "The house is as it is," he replied, as if beauty was an irrelevant fact. He held out a single, heavy, ornate iron key. It was the kind of key that belonged in a fairy tale, dark with age, its teeth worn smooth. I placed my hand out, and he laid it in my palm. It was cold, and surprisingly heavy. "The villa. It is not for everyone," he said, his eyes meeting mine. They were clear, unblinking. "It is a house that waits. It waits for someone who knows how to listen." I curled my fingers around the iron. The metal bit into my skin. "I'm a very good listener," I said. A flicker of something, approval, perhaps, passed over his features. "I believe you are. Benvenuta. Welcome." He showed me the kitchen, the main living areas, and then left me, as if he knew I needed to claim the space on my own. I walked through the arched stone doorways, my footsteps echoing softly on the ancient terracotta floors. The walls were impossibly thick, a good 2 feet, and the air inside was cool and still. I ran my hand along the rough, plastered wall of the main hallway. This was real. I inhaled, trying to catalog the scent. It wasn't the sterile lemon polish smell of my mother's house. It was the scent of time. It was the dry, earthy smell of the terracotta tiles warmed by the sun. It was the deep, resinous perfume of the massive chestnut beams that crossed the ceiling. And underneath it all, the faint, sweet, waxy smell of beeswax, used for a century to polish the sturdy, dark furniture. It was the most honest smell I had ever known. I found the main terrazza at the back, walking through a set of tall French doors. The view stopped my breath. It was a panoramic, unbroken vista of the entire valley, rolling hills stitched together with rows of cypress trees. distant farmhouses glowing like embers as the afternoon light deepened. I sat on the low stone wall, the key still heavy in my hand, in my old life. My wedding planner had a binder 4 inches thick, filled with timelines, vendor contracts, and seating charts designed to navigate the complex, fragile ecosystem of my family. Who couldn't sit next to whom? Whose ego needed to be nearest the head table, my role, my script. I pulled my leather notebook from my bag, the one I used for my real projects. I flipped to a clean page. At the top, I didn't write wedding plan. I wrote the party. I sketched the terrace and the adjoining lawn. I drew a long, straight line. One table, just one, a single, long, rustic table stretching under the pergola, which I could see was already heavy with grapevines. There would be no head table. There would be no table 1 versus table 10. There would be no subtle hierarchy, no designated family table to remind me I wasn't part of the inner circle. My family had chosen their priority. I was now choosing mine. My table would consist only of people who were there, unequivocally, for us. Rinaldi had recommended a local chef, someone who understood the house. She arrived an hour later, not in a van, but on a battered red Vespa, a wicker basket strapped to the back. Giada Romano. She couldn't have been more than 30, with a cascade of dark curly hair, flour dusting her cheek, and the brightest eyes I had ever seen. She walked onto the terrace, looked at my notebook, and nodded, a wide smile splitting her face. Ah, un tavolo lungo, one table, like a true family, a big, noisy, wonderful family. Or a small, quiet, wonderful one, I said. She laughed, a sound like bells. Those are the best. We didn't talk about canapes or tasting menus. We walked. She led me to the villa's orto, the kitchen garden, a sprawling, beautifully chaotic plot, hidden behind a row of rosemary bushes. She plucked tomatoes from the vine, crushing them lightly in her palm for me to smell. She snapped beans, tore leaves of basil, her hands moving with an energetic, earthy grace. The wedding in Rhode Island, I told her, was meant to have a 5-course tasting menu, Belgian endive, filet mignon. Giada made a face. That is not food. That is an apology. She plucked a fig, warm from the sun, and handed it to me. Here, you are in Tuscany. We do not apologize for our food. We celebrate it. What do you suggest? What do you love? I thought for a moment. I want it to taste like this, I said, gesturing to the garden, the stone, the air. I want it to be real. Then it is simple, she declared. We will have pizzi. It is the pasta of this valley, rolled by hand. We will make it with aglione, a sauce of many cloves of garlic and tomatoes, slow-cooked for hours. We will have pecorino from the farm in Pienza, the one you passed on the way here. We will have bread, baked that morning in the villa's forno. She pointed to the old wood-fired oven I hadn't even noticed. We will have the local wine, and these. She plucked a handful of herbs. That is all. It will be enough. We shook on it. My entire wedding, the one that truly mattered, was planned in 20 minutes, standing in a garden, with a woman I had just met. That evening, I sat on the terrace as the sun dissolved into the hills. The sky turned from gold to a deep, bruised purple. The wind was a gentle sigh, carrying the scent of rosemary and thyme. I sat at a small iron table, a glass of the local vernaccia by my side, and I wrote in my notebook, not tasks, not logistics, but feelings. I wrote about the scent of the beeswax. I wrote about the solid weight of the key. I wrote about Giada's laugh. For the first time in perhaps a decade, the knot of tension that lived permanently between my shoulder blades dissolved. It didn't just loosen. It vanished. I felt my shoulders drop. I felt my jaw unclench. I was, for the first time in my adult life, completely and utterly at peace. I picked up my phone. The screen lit up, showing a cascade of missed calls and frantic texts from Rhode Island. I ignored them all and dialed the one number I wanted. Liam answered on the first ring, as he always did. "You're there," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was the anchor, the one true stable point in my entire universe. "I'm here? And how is it?" I leaned my head back, looking up at the first stars pricking the velvet sky. "Liam," I said, my voice quiet, "what if this is it? What if this is my peace? The thing I've been working for my whole life, and I just bought it?" There was a moment of silence on the line, but it wasn't the silence of indecision my parents specialized in. It was the silence of him listening. "Then you stay," he said, his voice firm, resolute, cutting through any lingering doubt. "You stay in your peace." A tear, the first one I had allowed, slipped down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of profound, aching relief. "I'm meant to be getting married in Rhode Island in 6 days, I whispered. "No, you're not," he said, gently. "You're meant to be getting married to me, and I am meant to be getting married to you. The where is just logistics." I laughed, a small biottery sound. "I'm the COO of a logistics company. I can handle the logistics." "I know you can." I could hear the smile in his voice. "So, what are the new logistics, boss?" "The new logistics," I said, sitting up, the iron in my voice returning, "are that I am in Tuscany, and I am never leaving." "Good," he said, "because I'm at JFK. I'm coming. I'll be there tomorrow." I closed my eyes. "I love you." "I love you, Serenity. I'll see you at home." After the call, I went back inside, to the grand, ancient dining room. The next day, I didn't go online. I didn't look for a rush order printing service. I drove to the small, beautiful cartolleria in Pienza and bought the most expensive, thick, cream-colored paper they had. It was soft as suede, with a rough, deckled edge, and I bought a small box of pressed, dried olive leaves. I sat at the massive oak table, a bottle of ink and my grandmother's old fountain pen before me. I didn't write hundreds. I wrote 10. I wrote one to Raina. I wrote one to Liam's parents. I wrote one to 2 friends from college who had seen me, really seen me, long before I had a title or a villa. And I wrote one for my grandmother, Abuela Lucinda. The invitation was simple: the date, the location, Villa Lucinda, Val d'Orcia, Tuscany. At the bottom, where the formal RSVP line should have been, I wrote the only line that now mattered. I dipped the pen and wrote it by hand, over and over. "For those who truly come." Liam arrived as the cypress trees were turning into dark blue shadows against a bruised purple sky. He stepped out of the car, and the gravel crunched under his feet, the only sound in the valley. He didn't ask what had happened, didn't demand a timeline of the insults, didn't say, "I told you so." He just walked up the stone steps, put his luggage down, took the heavy iron key from my hand, and held my face between his palms. "This is home," he said, and kissed me. It was not a kiss of desperate passion. It was a kiss of fact, a kiss of arrival. We spent the next day not as refugees, but as owners. We walked the property. Liam, an architect who understood the bones of a place, ran his hand along the same tufa stone walls I had, a look of profound respect on his face. "This place will outlast everyone," he murmured. "It's honest." Honest, that was the word. That evening, we sat on the terrace with 2 glasses of wine, planning the real logistics, the logistics of joy. "Music," Liam said, looking out at the space where I'd sketched the long table. "What do you want?" "Something simple," I said. "Acoustic. Something that feels like the air here." As I said it, my mind drifted, pulled by an invisible string back to the archives, the Sanchez family photo albums. They lived on the bottom shelf of the coffee table in Rhode Island, heavy, leather-bound volumes, their pages thick as cardboard. They were the official, curated history of our family, and they were a lie. Page after page. Sierra. Sierra at the beach. Center frame. Sierra blowing out birthday candles, a halo of light around her head. Sierra at her ballet recital. her arms outstretched. The rest of the dancers blurred in the background. My father was the family historian, the one with the expensive camera, and his lens only had one true subject. I was there, of course. I existed. I was the elbow on the far right of the frame. I was the half-face hidden behind my mother's hair. I was the out-of-focus figure in the background, walking away. I was the shadow. I remember the exact moment I stopped being a person and became a composition problem. I was 16. I had found a small, forgotten box of 4x6 prints, the originals, waiting to be curated. I found one of my mother and me at a spring fair. I was in a blue dress. I was smiling, my arm linked with hers. It was, I thought, a nice picture. I looked happy. Later, I saw the album, the official record. The picture was there, but it was different. It had been trimmed to fit the 3x5 plastic sleeve. My mother's face was perfectly centered. My face, my smile, my blue dress, they were gone, sliced clean off. A sliver of my blue shoulder remained, a meaningless speck of color at the edge of the frame. I had brought the original print to her, confused. "Why did you cut me out?" My mother, Diana, didn't even look up from her magazine. "Oh, honey, don't be so dramatic." Her voice was light, airy, as if I'd asked about the weather. "It wasn't about you. The frame was a specific size. It was just for better composition. It looked cleaner this way." Cleaner. My absence made the picture cleaner. I learned the lesson. To be present was to be clutter, to be dramatic. The path to peace was to make myself small, to trim myself from the edges, to learn to disappear so they could be comfortable. The pattern was set, reinforced at every turn. My high school graduation, I was valedictorian. I had spent weeks on my speech, a speech about unseen structures, which I thought was clever. I looked out from the podium at the rows of proud families. My eyes found my own. My father, with his camera, lens pointed at the stage. My mother, beaming, and an empty chair, right between them. The empty chair where Sierra was supposed to be. Later, at the celebratory dinner, I had been allowed to choose, a quiet Italian place. The excuses came. "She tried. Serenity," my mother said, rearranging her silverware. "She really did, but her friend, the one with the breakup, she was just in a crisis. Sierra is so loyal. She's just so busy. You understand? You're the stable one." I understood. My moment, my achievement, was a scheduling conflict. Sierra's drama was a crisis. I was stable. I was the designated driver of the family's emotional life, the one who was expected to get everyone home safe, the one who never got to drink. Even my father, Hector, reinforced it. When Sierra, in her early 20s, decided to launch a line of artisanal, hand-painted, something, I was never clear on the details, she needed a loan, not from a bank, from me. The lucky one, the one who had been working and saving since I was 15. Who had just received my first significant bonus from Everlane. "She just needs a little start, mija," my father had said, his arm around Sierra's shoulder. "Just 10,000, to get her on her feet." When, 6 months later, the business had evaporated and the money was gone. I made the mistake of asking about it. Sierra had cried, and my father had taken me aside, his face a mask of disappointment. "She's young," he said, his voice low and firm. "She's figuring things out. She's not like you. Serenity. She's an artist. She's sensitive. You're the one who is good with money. You're strong. Let it go. It's just money." It was never just money. It was never just a picture. It was never just a graduation. It was my life. It was 1,000 tiny cuts, 1,000 quiet dismissals, 1,000 lessons in how to be invisible. I had learned, with perfect, straight-A student precision, that silence was the language of sacrifice. My silence was the air my family breathed. My silence bought the peace. My silence kept the composition clean. Sitting there on the terrace in Tuscany, the wind lifting my hair. I looked at Liam. He was already scrolling, looking for local musicians. "I'm done," I said, my voice quiet, but it felt like the loudest sound in the valley. "Done with what?" he asked, looking up. "Begging for a seat. I'm done hoping they'll trim the picture differently. I'm just building a new house." "And a new table," he said, smiling. I nodded. I picked up my laptop. I found a local event service. I found them. Fratelli Sognanti, the Dreaming Brothers, a local acoustic duo. I listened to 30 seconds of a sample. A simple, beautiful guitar melody. It was the sound of the valley. It was the sound of peace. I didn't ask for a set list. I didn't ask for references. I paid the deposit. Another click. Another link in the old chain broken. My phone buzzed on the stone table. I tensed. The old reflex. A text from my mother. Surely, an escalation. But it wasn't. It was Raina, my cousin, my ally. I had texted her the bare-bones facts. New plan. Wedding is in Tuscany. Same day. Family is boycotting. You're invited. Raina's reply came in. Boycotting? You mean they finally admitted they weren't the main characters in your life? Good. Fuck 'em. A second text came immediately after. You build that damn table. Serenity. You build it long and you build it strong. And you make damn sure it has a seat for you, front and center. I hadn't realized I was crying until a tear hit the screen. Not the hot, angry tears I had swallowed for years, but the warm, releasing tears of recognition. She saw me. She had always seen me. I texted back, "It's a very long table." Raina replied, "Good. Who's on the invite list for the real table?" The real table. I laughed. It was the perfect name. It's a group chat now. She sent, "The real table. I'm adding myself." A moment later, another message notification appeared. This one was not from Raina. It was a new number, an international code. It was a name I had not dared to hope for. Abuela Lucinda. My grandmother, my mother's mother, the one who had told me not to disappear. She was 80 years old. She did not text. She barely used the smartphone my mother had forced on her. It wasn't a text. It was a picture. I clicked it. The image was blurry, taken at a bad angle, but it was unmistakable. It was a screenshot of a flight confirmation. Delta Airlines, PVD to FLR, arriving Friday. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the name, Lucinda Morales. A second message came through. This one text. The letters were all capitalized, the way she typed. Mija, I am coming. I have always owed you this. I dropped the phone. Liam was at my side in a second, his hand on my back. Serenity? What is it? What did they say? I couldn't speak. I just turned the phone around and showed him. He read the screenshot. He read the text from Lucinda. He wrapped his arms around me as I finally let myself sob. The real table, he whispered into my hair, holding me tight. It's starting. I looked out at the lawn, at the long, empty space under the pergola. It wasn't empty anymore. I could see the chairs. I could see the faces. They were few, but they were coming. They were really coming. The peace in the villa was a living thing. It settled into the spaces between the ancient stones. It lived in the scent of wild thyme Liam and I brushed against on our walks, and it rested in the silence of the evenings. A silence broken only by the clink of our wine glasses and the distant sounds of the valley. We were in a bubble of our own making, sourcing cheese from the local casificio, talking to Giada about the menu, and finalizing the flight for Liam's parents, who had, without a single question, said, "We will be wherever you are." It was into this new, fragile peace that the first call from Rhode Island finally breached. It was Wednesday, 3 days before the wedding. My phone, which I had left on the kitchen's thick marble counter, began to vibrate, a harsh, angry buzz on the cold stone. I looked at the screen. My mother. Liam, who was reading on the terrace, caught my eye. I held up the phone. He nodded, his expression unreadable, and closed his book. I took a breath, the way you do before lowering yourself into ice-cold water, and answered, "Serenity, thank God. I've been calling." Her voice was high, frantic, the edges frayed with a manufactured panic. "You haven't been answering. We've all been so worried." The collective. "I'm here, Mom." "Well, listen," she said, her tone shifting immediately from panic to business. "I am glad I finally got you, because this has all just been a terrible misunderstanding, and I have a solution." I waited. I said nothing. The silence stretched, and I could hear her breathing, a little too fast. "You need to change your schedule," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "It's the only sensible thing to do. You and Liam, you just postpone. For a few weeks, maybe do a nice spring wedding next month. Then, we can all fly to Florence, or wherever you are, and celebrate with you properly. It's the perfect compromise." "A compromise," I repeated. The word tasted like ash. "Yes, exactly. It's just so much easier for everyone that way." "Easier for everyone." I walked slowly to the open terrace doors. The phone pressed to my ear. The sun was warm on my face. "Who is everyone, Mom?" The line went utterly, completely still. The manufactured energy, the frantic, high-pitched planning, all of it just stopped. It was a vacuum. I could hear the faint, electronic hiss of the long-distance connection. I heard her inhale, a small, sharp, un-Diana-like sound. She had no script for this question. Everyone was the word she used to mean me and Sierra. To have it questioned, to have the definition demanded, was like pulling a load-bearing wall out of her reality. "Well, you know," she finally stammered, "the family, the guests, it's just the logical thing. Serenity, it's too confusing for people." "It seems very clear to me," I said, my voice as calm as the valley in front of me. "You and Dad and Sierra made your choice. You chose your priority, and I've chosen mine. Serenity, don't be so—" "I have to go. Mom, the planners are here." I disconnected the call. I didn't slam the phone down. I pressed the red icon on the screen and I set the phone back on the marble counter. I looked at Liam. "She wants me to postpone," I said. "Of course she does," he said, and went back to his book. The simplicity of his acceptance was its own reward. The second call came 2 hours later. This time, I was prepared. My father, Hector, the closer. "Serenity?" His voice was the one I remembered from my childhood. The deep, booming, everything is fine voice. The voice that could charm anyone, sell anything. The voice that glossed over every uncomfortable truth. "Hi, Dad. I just spoke to your mother. She's very upset. Mija, this whole thing has gotten out of hand. We just need to be the grown-ups here. We, the royal we this time, meaning you. I am being a grown-up. Dad, I'm getting married on Saturday." He sighed, a long, practiced, paternal sound of disappointment. It was the sound he used to make when I'd gotten a 98 on a test instead of a 100. "Listen to me. Serenity, you know we love you, you and your sister. You're our world. But this is causing a tear. And your mother and we're caught in the middle."
"You are not in the middle. Dad, you are on a side. You made that clear."
"That's not fair," he snapped, the charming mask slipping for a second. He recovered quickly. "That's not fair. We are trying to keep the peace. You? Serenity, you have always been the strong one. You are the one who is tough. You're the one who understands." There it was, the word, the weapon they had always used against me, the one my mother had programmed, the one my father wielded. Understanding, the burden of the lucky one. I laughed. It was not a nice sound. It was not a happy sound. It was a short, sharp, cold bark of air that surprised even me. It was the sound of a spring snapping, a spring that had been coiled tight for 28 years. "Dad?" I asked, the laugh still caught in my throat. Does understanding just mean sacrificing? Is that what it has always meant? Serenity. That is not what I am saying. Because if it is, you're right. I've been very understanding my whole life. I understood when I was cut out of the photos. I understood when you forgot my graduation. I understood when Sierra's sensitivity was more important than my achievements. But I'm afraid I've run out of understanding. My account is empty. It's been overdrawn for years. You are twisting my words, he said, his voice hard. You are being selfish. You are punishing your sister for being happy. I am not punishing her, I said, my voice dropping, the coldness now absolute. I am simply removing myself from the composition. It's cleaner this way, don't you think? I hung up before he could answer. That time, my hand was shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline. The silence in the villa was profound. Liam had not moved, but his book was closed on his lap. He was watching me. It is done, I said. It is done, he agreed. The third and final. Strike came not as a call, but as a text from Sierra. It was, of course, a photo, a bright, oversaturated, terribly lit selfie. She was in the Providence wedding hall, the one they had chosen. It was a standard, beige hotel ballroom, currently decorated with stacks of chairs and rolled-up carpet. Sierra was in the foreground, making a kissy face, her hand, with the gaudy engagement ring, held up beside her cheek. The text underneath read, "It's all coming together. I can't believe we're getting married on the same day. LOL. It's fate, sis." Fate? She was right. It was. I stared at the beige room, the beige carpet, the beige walls, the beige soul of it all. I thought of the tufa stone, the terracotta floors, the scent of rosemary. I thought of the view of the valley. I saved the photo. I archived it in the same mental folder. I labeled it beige. Then I walked over to the desk in the corner of the salon, the one Signor Rinaldi had stocked with fresh ink and my favorite pens. The final purchase documents for the villa were sitting in a neat leather folio. I had bought it, yes, but the final, formal transfer of the deed into the Lucinda Trust was scheduled for this week, a beautiful, logistical coincidence. My lawyer, Marco Ferri, the same man who would be officiating our wedding, had left them for my signature. I opened the folder. I read the legal language. I saw my name. I saw my grandmother's name. I saw the name of the villa, Villa Lucinda. I picked up the heavy, old-fashioned fountain pen. I unscrewed the cap. I signed my name, Serenity Sanchez. It was a firm, clear signature. The ink was a deep, dark blue. With that stroke, the house was no longer just a purchase. It was an anchor. It was a declaration. It was the headquarters of the real table. I was signing my own fate. The backlash was not instant. It was a series of small, quiet fractures. An email from my tia Isabella, my father's sister. Serenity, mija, I am hearing things. Your mother is very upset. I just want to know you are okay. P.S. What is the airport code for Florence? Just in case. A text from my cousin Carlos. Hey, heard you're in Italy. Sierra's wedding is a lot. Let me know if you need anything. I mean, anything. They were testing the waters. They were seeing if the narrative my mother was spinning, that I was a difficult, spiteful, runaway bride, held up. They were starting to suspect it didn't. And then, my mother played her final card. She was, if nothing else, a creature of habit. When cornered, she did what she always did. She controlled the aesthetics. Raina sent me the screenshot. My mother had created a new family group chat, the old one. Sanchez family was apparently now defunct. This new one was titled The Main Event. Raina had been added, and in a moment of supreme, baffling arrogance, so had I. My mother probably assumed I would be too ashamed to look. The chat was a flurry of messages from Diana. Hello, family. Just a reminder that the dress code for Sierra's wedding is shades of lavender. Please adhere to this, as the photos will be very important. A second message. Also, a note on seating. We will be giving priority to the groom's side of the family for the front rows, to make them feel welcome. We all understand. I stared at the words, lavender, priority to the groom's side. She was ceding her own family's territory, pushing them to the back, all for the sake of appearances. She was literally, in text, telling her family they were second place. And then, Reina's text, to me alone, a screenshot of a side chat she was in with my tia Isabella. Isabella, she is calling Sierra's wedding the main event? What does that make Serenity's? The reply, from someone else, a cousin I barely knew. I hear they're calling it the dress rehearsal. The dress rehearsal? I read the words. I felt nothing. The part of me that could be wounded by this was gone. It had been cauterized. It was scar tissue now, and scar tissue is stronger than the skin that was there before. I did not reply to the group chat. I did not leave the group chat. I simply turned off the notifications. I silenced them, in every way. I walked back out to the terrace, where Liam was, finally, reading. The evening was settling, and the first hints of Giada's cooking were drifting from the kitchen. Garlic, rosemary, slow-roasting meat. "Rinaldi," I called out. He appeared from the garden, a pair of pruning shears in his hand. "Signora?" "We need to update the table order." He raised an eyebrow, his professional calm unshaken. "We need," I said, looking out at the long, beautiful stretch of lawn, "to add 6 more chairs." It is 4:00 in the afternoon in Tuscany. It is 10:00 in the morning in Providence, Rhode Island. In Providence, a damp, gray rain streaks the tall windows of the hotel ballroom, blurring the view of the parking garage. The air inside is cold. A fierce, humming air conditioner, cranked high to combat the non-existent summer heat, blasts the room with a sterile chill. In the front row, on the priority groom's side, the floral arrangements of lavender and white roses have begun to wilt, their petals turning a sad, translucent brown at the edges. In Tuscany, the sun is a heavy golden weight, pressing the scent of wild thyme and rosemary from the earth. The air is warm, alive, and smells of dust and baking stone. On the terrazza of Villa Lucinda, a slight breeze, the maestrale, blows up from the valley, making the long strings of Edison bulbs, strung through the pergola, shiver and dance. In Providence, my mother, Diana Sanchez, stands near the guest book, a monument in shimmering lavender taffeta. Her smile is a bright, brittle thing, painted on, a rictus of social grace. Her eyes, however, are sharp, scanning, doing a frantic, failing inventory. The first row on her side of the aisle, the bride's side, is a gaping, embarrassing void. The chairs, draped in white polyester, sit empty. Tia Isabella is not there. Carlos is not there. My father's cousins are not there. And most devastatingly, her own mother, Lucinda Morales, is not there. In Tuscany, Giada Romano and her team are laying out the antipasti, not on silver trays, but on long, rustic wooden boards that run the length of the single table. Giada, her face flushed with heat and joy, carries a basket of bread, baked that morning in the villa's forno. The crust is dark, almost charred, and the smell of it, mixed with the sharp, green perfume of fresh-pressed olive oil, is the only air we breathe. Laughter, real and unforced, echoes from the lawn as my college friends try to teach Liam's father how to play bocce. In Providence, my father, Hector, checks his watch, a heavy gold-plated status symbol. It is 10:03 a.m. The main event was supposed to start at 10. He glares at the empty chairs, his face a thundercloud of public humiliation. He sees the groom's parents whispering, their heads tilted together, their eyes also on the empty rows. He adjusts his lavender tie, a noose of my mother's making, and can feel the sweat beading on his collar. In Tuscany, my grandmother, Abuela Lucinda, walks the length of the long table. She has refused to be seated, inspecting every detail like a benevolent general. She has changed from her traveling clothes into a simple, elegant dress, the color of the earth. She stops, and from her pocket, she pulls a small, silver-leafed branch she has just cut from one of the olive trees. She places it in the center of the table, next to the handwritten place card for Marco Ferri, our officiant. She runs her finger over the leaves. "In my village," she says, "not to me, but to the air, to the house. This is the sign of peace, not the peace you beg for, the peace you make." In Providence, Sierra is in the bridal suite, a converted beige-on-beige hotel room. She is standing in front of a full-length mirror, flanked by bridesmaids in matching, ill-fitting lavender dresses. She is adjusting her veil, a massive, poofy creation of synthetic tulle that dwarfs her small frame. She fusses with a curl. She checks her teeth. She looks at her reflection, and for a fleeting second, the destiny she was so sure of flickers. The room feels cold. In Tuscany, Liam stands on the terrace, a glass of dark red, almost purple Brunello in his hand. He is not in a tuxedo. He is in a perfectly tailored suit of dark blue linen, his white shirt open at the collar. He is listening to Tia Isabella, who has her hand on his arm and is telling him a long, dramatic story in rapid-fire Spanish, which he does not understand, but is nodding along to, smiling. He sees me step out of the villa's main door. His conversation stops. He adjusts the cuff of his shirt, a small, unconscious gesture. His eyes, fixed on me, are the only anchor I have ever needed. I did not have a dress shipped from Rhode Island. I had no gown in a garment bag. 2 days ago, Liam and I drove to Siena. We found a small, independent sartoria, a dressmaker's shop, run by a woman whose hands were as weathered as Signor Rinaldi's. I had chosen the only dress she had in the window. It is not a wedding gown. It is a dress. It is made of the heaviest, softest, cream-colored silk, cut on the bias, with a low back and thin straps. It flows when I move, not with the stiff architecture of Sierra's dress, but like water. It is simple. It is real. As I step onto the terrace, the late afternoon sun hits the fabric, and it does not sparkle with sequins or beads. It glows, a soft, warm, liquid gold, as if the light itself is woven into the threads. The guests are arriving, all 26 of them. Reina is here, in a bright red dress that defies any and all dress codes. Her eyes shining. Tia Isabella and Carlos are here. Having told my father they had a last-minute scheduling conflict before turning off their phones, Liam's parents are here, his mother weeping softly as she hugs me, whispering, "It's the most beautiful wedding I have ever seen." My 2 college friends, the ones who split tequila with me, are here, already holding glasses of wine. There is no guest book. There is no seating chart. No one asks, "Where do I sit?" They find a glass. They find a hand to shake. They find a place at the long, single, welcoming table. There is no hierarchy. Reina sits next to Liam's father. Tia Isabella sits next to my old roommate. They are not defined by their side. They are just here. Reina, always the historian, the one who saw the truth, pulls out her phone. She does not take a selfie. She steps back, onto the stone wall, to get the entire scene in. The long, beautiful, chaotic table, groaning with real food, the laughing, talking, mingling guests, the dark blue cypress trees in the distance, the golden, honey-thick light, Abuela Lucinda, raising her glass, Liam, his back to the camera, his hand reaching for mine, and me, in my silk dress, finally, turning toward the light. She clicks the button. She looks at the image. It is perfect. It is the truth. She opens her text messages. She finds the group chat, the one named The Main Event, and she presses send. In Providence, Rhode Island, at 10:09 a.m., just as the organist begins a watery, hesitant rendition of Canon in D, just as Sierra is stepping into the beige hallway to begin her walk, a phone in the front row buzzes, then another, and another, a chorus of angry, insistent vibrations, cutting through the thin music as the first photo of the real main event lands, an explosion of Tuscan gold in a sea of beige. There was no aisle. There was no processional. There was just a moment. The sun had begun its final descent, the light turning from gold to a soft, bruised apricot. It was no longer a harsh, overhead spotlight, but a low, angled beam that cut sideways through the pergola, slicing through the hanging leaves of the grapevines, painting the stone terrace in stripes of warmth and shadow. The Fratelli Sognanti were playing, a melody so simple and clean it felt as if it were rising from the earth itself. Our guests, our 26, had gathered in a loose, standing half-circle around us. They were not an audience. They were participants. They were the witnesses. Marco Ferri, the man who had finalized the deed to my fortress, the man who had become a friend, stood with us. He was not wearing a robe, but a simple linen jacket. He, too, was a part of the real table. He held no book. He just waited until the music faded to a single, held guitar note, and then he spoke. His voice was not the booming, theatrical voice of a performer, but the measured, kind voice of a man who understood contracts, both legal and human. "We are here," he said, his eyes moving from me to Liam. "For a declaration, not a performance," he smiled. A small, genuine gesture. In my life, I have seen many celebrations, and I have learned that love is not measured by the number of people who are invited. His eyes found mine, and he knew everything. "It is measured," he continued, his voice gaining a quiet, firm resonance that carried on the wind, "by who shows up." A small, collective breath was drawn by the people around us. Tia Isabella's hand went to her heart. The words landed. They were not just for us. They were for everyone standing there, for every person who had boarded a plane, who had defied a family summons, who had chosen to be present. Liam took my hands. His were warm, dry, and steady. They were the hands of an architect, a builder. He spoke his vows first, and they were not poetry. They were better. They were a promise of structure. He promised to be the foundation. He promised to be the wall that stood against the wind. He promised that with me, the composition was finally, and forever, clean. Then it was my turn. I looked at his face, the face I had seen across my office, the face I had seen on a pixelated video call, the face I now saw illuminated by the Tuscan twilight. I thought of all the words I had swallowed, all the speeches I had never been allowed to make, all the times I had been told to be quiet, to be the lucky one. I took a breath, and the words I had written in my notebook, the only words that mattered, came out. They were not for my parents. They were not for Sierra. They were for the man in front of me, and for the people who had gathered to listen. "I have learned," I said, my voice clear, not a tremor in it, "that the work that matters is almost always done in silence, that strength is not loud, that the people who truly build you are the ones who see you when you are invisible." I looked past Liam, for just a second, to Raina, whose eyes were bright with tears, to Liam's parents, who were holding hands. "My whole life," I said, my gaze returning to Liam's, "I have been looking for the spotlight, and then I met you. And you did not offer me a stage. You offered me a home. You saw me. You have always seen me. And so, I promise to you," I said, my voice dropping, "what you have given me, I promise to be your witness. I promise to see the work you do when no one is watching. My vow is for the quiet moments. My vow is for the unseen efforts. My vow," I finished, "is for those who stay when no one is watching." There was a profound, perfect silence. The sun had dipped lower. The shadows were long. From the side, I saw movement. My grandmother, Abuela Lucinda. She stepped forward, not into the center, but just close enough. She was not crying. Her face was a mask of ancient, powerful resolution. In her hand, she held the small, silver-green olive branch she had plucked from the tree earlier. As I finished speaking, she raised it, not as a wave, but as a standard, a sigil. Then, she reached out her other hand, the one that was thin-skinned, covered in the fine, papery wrinkles of her 80 years. She did not pat my hand. She did not stroke it. She laid it, firmly, on top of mine and Liam's. Her touch was a shock, a transfer of energy, of legacy. It was an anointing. It was the closing of one contract and the signing of another. She held it there. 1, 2, 3, a seal. Then she stepped back. Marco smiled. Then, by the authority invested in me, by the laws of Italy, and by the truth of this moment, I declare you married. Liam, you may kiss your wife. Serenity, you may kiss your husband. Liam pulled me in, and the kiss was not a performance for a camera. It was a moment of absolute, bone-deep relief. It was the feeling of a door locking, a key turning, a deed being signed. The sound that came was not an explosion. It was not the roar of a crowd. It was the sound of 26 people, clapping. It was a small, warm, intimate sound. I could hear Raina's whoop. I could hear Liam's father's solid, rhythmic applause. I could hear the distinct, individual sounds of palms meeting. A small, real, human chorus. And just like that, the spell was broken, and the joy began. The Fratelli Sognanti struck a chord, and a lively, bright, fast-paced melody took over. The ceremony, all 10 minutes of it, was done. The party, the one that would last a lifetime, had begun. Chairs scraped on the stone terrace as people finally sat at the long table. The energy shifted, from reverence to celebration. Giada and her team emerged from the kitchen, and it was a parade of wonders. The steam rising from the massive platters of peachy was a cloud of garlic and slow-cooked tomato. The scent of truffle, sharp and earthy and decadent, filled the air as Giada herself walked down the table, shaving the black diamonds over each plate. Wine was poured, the deep, dark Brunello that stained the glasses. The sun was gone. It had left the sky in a final, glorious blaze, and now the world was falling into that deep, perfect, impossible Tuscan purple. It was the moment of dusk, the crepuscolo, when everything is soft and magic is possible. And at that precise moment, as if summoned by Rinaldi with a silent signal, the strings of lights above us buzzed to life. They were not the harsh, blue-white LEDs of a hotel ballroom. They were warm, yellow, Edison bulbs. They cast a glow so soft, so golden, that it made every face at the table look like a subject in a Renaissance painting. The light caught the red in the wine. It warmed the cream of my dress. It lit the laughter in the eyes of our friends. I sat at the head of the table. No, not the head. Just a seat. My seat. With Liam beside me. And I looked. I let my gaze travel down the long, single, unbroken line of wood. I saw Tia Isabella, her lavender suit forgotten, in a bright floral dress, her head thrown back, laughing at something Liam's father, a man she had met only 2 hours ago, had said. I saw Raina, deep in conversation with my college roommate, their hands flying, a bottle of wine between them, in their own world. I saw Carlos, quiet, thoughtful Carlos, sketching something on a napkin for Liam. The two of them bent over the drawing, smiling. I saw Abuela Lucinda, holding her wineglass, her eyes closed, just listening to the music, a small, satisfied smile on her face. Every seat was filled, every chair was taken, every person who was meant to be here was here. I made eye contact, one by one, with every person at that table, and every single person, when they caught my eye, raised their glass to me, their eyes shining, not with pity, not with apology, but with joy, with recognition. There were no gaps. There were no empty spaces. There was no one who needed to be cropped. The composition was perfect. Liam had been watching me. I turned to find him already looking at me, his own glass in his hand, a look of such profound, quiet understanding on his face that it almost made my heart stop. He leaned in. The sound of the party, the music, the laughter, the clinking of plates, all of it faded for one single, perfect second, he whispered, so low that only I and the stones of the villa could hear. "We don't need," he said, "any other validation." I closed my eyes. It was the final truth. At that exact same moment, 9 time zones away, in a beige, overlit ballroom in Providence, Rhode Island, the party was winding down. The main event was over. The guests, restless and whispering, were already leaving, clutching their party favors. The cake was half eaten. The lavender centerpieces were being cleared. A hired 4-piece band, in matching, slightly too large black tuxedos, stood on a small carpeted stage, playing to a room that was mostly empty chairs. They were playing the last song of their contracted set list. In the cavernous, cold, quiet room, the tinny, synthesized notes of family unity echoed. It was the sound of an obligation being met, a hollow tune playing for no one. The party in Tuscany was not a performance. It was an unwinding. As the sky turned from deep, royal purple to a profound, velvety black, the strings of lights took over, casting their warm golden glow, turning the terrazza into a self-contained universe. The Fratelli Sognanti had not packed up after the ceremony. They had simply transitioned, their music becoming the bloodstream of the evening, the sound of the acoustic guitar. A rhythm both lively and soulful wove itself between the clinking of glasses and the rising volume of real, unrestrained laughter. I had not sat for more than 10 minutes at a time. I was moving, propelled by a lightness I had never known. I was talking with Liam's mother, her hand in mine, as she told me a story about him as a child, her eyes shining with a pride that was simple, uncomplicated, and pure. I was clinking glasses with Tia Isabella, who pulled me into a fierce hug, her voice booming. This is a wedding, mija, the food, the wine, this is a family." I found Reina by the stone wall, trying to teach my old college roommate, a woman from Ohio, the basics of a salsa step, and they were both failing, collapsing into giggles. The scent of truffle and garlic had faded, replaced by the cool, dark perfume of the night air, the smell of cypress and dry earth. Every person, every single one of the 26, was engaged, connected, present. I had left my phone inside, on the marble counter in the kitchen, a deliberate act of disconnection. It was a beacon of the old world, and I wanted no part of it. But after an hour or two of dancing, I went inside to fetch a wrap, the night air finally cooling. The kitchen was dark, save for the blue-white light of the phone screen. It was lit up, a frantic, pulsing, digital emergency. It was vibrating, buzzing against the marble with a sound like an angry, trapped insect. I did not need to touch it to see the triage list. 12 missed calls from Mom, 8 missed calls from Dad, 5 missed calls from Sierra, a wall of text messages, a cascade of notifications from the main event group chat, a flurry of panic I could feel, even from here, a palpable wave of radiation. They had seen the photo. The silence from Tuscany had been broken, and the shockwave had hit Rhode Island. I looked at the phone, this small, demanding tyrant, demanding I re-engage, that I manage their feelings, that I explain myself, that I apologize, that I shrink back down. I felt the old pull, the old reflex, the automatic tensing of my shoulders. Serenity, the stable one. Serenity, the one who understands. I reached out, but not to answer. My thumb went to the power button on the side. I pressed it. The screen did not immediately go dark. It offered me a choice. Slide to power off. I did. The screen went black. The angry buzzing stopped. The frantic blue-white light vanished. The silence of the ancient stone kitchen rushed in to fill the void. It was a profound, deep, velvety silence, and it was the most powerful sound in the world. I took a breath. I picked up my shawl. I walked back outside, leaving the dark phone behind. As I opened the door, the sound rushed at me again, but this time, it was the right sound. It was the sound of the guitar, the sound of Liam's father telling a joke, the sound of Tia Isabella's laughter. It was the sound of my life. It was much later, after the music had faded, after the last of the peachy was gone, after the guests, warm with wine and happiness, had drifted off to their rooms in the villa, that the full report came. Liam and I were sitting on the low stone wall of the terrace, sharing the last glass of Brunello. The valley below us, a sea of absolute blackness, the sky above a diamond-sharp spray of stars. My phone, which I had eventually retrieved, buzzed once, softly, in my lap. It was Raina, not a text, a call. I answered, putting her on speaker. "You are alive," she said. Her voice was not sleepy. It was high, wired, electric. "We are," I said, smiling at Liam. "Because I just back-channel bombed a 600-person wedding in Providence, and I need you to know exactly what you did." "What did you do, Raina?" Liam asked, laughing. "I just provided an alternative narrative," Raina said, the glee in her voice palpable. "Okay, so I sent the photo, the one of the table, with everyone, and Abuela looking like a goddamn queen. I sent it to the main event chat right at 10:01, just as Sierra was supposed to be walking down the aisle." She took a breath. "Sari, it was, well, bicomical doesn't even begin to cover it. I have been getting a play-by-play from Carlos and two of our other cousins who were actually there, trapped in the beige prison." "What happened?" I asked, my voice quiet. "What happened? A bridesmaid named Tiffany, apparently, was the first one to see it. She was in the back with Sierra, and her phone buzzed. Carlos said she literally shrieked. She grabbed the other bridesmaid and said, 'Oh my God, they're in Italy?' She said it out loud, like a banshee. And then, the phones. Oh, the phones. The guests were already seated. The groom's priority side. They all got the notification. And suddenly, no one is looking at the front. No one is waiting for the bride. A phone is being passed down the row, and what they are looking at, Sari, is you, in that dress, you and Abuela, under the lights. They were passing around the picture of the real table." Liam reached for my hand. "Carlos said Sierra saw it," Raina continued, her voice dropping, mimicking a narrator. "She was standing at the back of the aisle. She saw them looking at the phone. She just froze, her hand, with the bouquet, just shaking, the wilted flowers trembling." "Oh, God," I whispered. "No, wait, it gets better. Diana, of course, saw her falter. She hissed at her. Carlos was close enough to hear it. She said, 'Do not look at that. You get your head up, you save face, you walk.'" "Save face," I repeated, the old motto. "But Hector," Raina said, and I could hear her grin. "Hector, he was at the front, next to Diana. He saw the empty chairs on his side. He saw the guests looking at the phone. He saw everything, and Carlos heard him. He didn't yell. He just mumbled it to himself, like he'd just been punched." "What?" "They chose her. That's what he said. They chose her." I closed my eyes. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was a cold, quiet, heavy thing. It was the sound of a truth, locked in a basement for decades, finally breaking down the door. "The whole ceremony," Raina said, "was a joke. Everyone was whispering, 'Where is Lucinda Morales?' Did you see Isabella? They're all in Italy. Serenity is in Italy. And Diana, at the front, her back rigid, her lavender dress practically vibrating with rage." "And the reception?" Liam asked. "A morgue, a beautiful beige, lavender-scented morgue. Everyone was just on their phones. I think they were comparing the food, the lights, and then the toast." "The toast?" "The MC, the poor, hired schlub. He gets up, trying to inject some life into the room. He raises his glass of cheap champagne, and he says, 'And now, a very special toast to the happy couple and to family unity.'" Liam and I just stared at each other in the darkness. "Raina," I said, "please tell me they didn't—" "He said it. To family unity. And Sari, I swear on my life, Carlos said no one clinked their glass. Not one. The whole room was just silence. The groom's family just staring at Hector and Diana. It was the most awkward, painful, glorious moment of social collapse he has ever witnessed. I let out a breath I had been holding for 28 years. "So," Raina said, her voice finally softening, "I'm glad you turned your phone off. You were busy. You were hosting the real party." "It was a good party," I said. "I know. I've been looking at the photo, the one I posted." She paused. "You know, it's all over the family network now. Cousins I haven't spoken to in years are texting me for it, and no one is adding a caption. They're just posting the picture." "Why?" "Because you don't need one. It's just the long table, the lights, the food, and all of you. Smiling, not posing, just smiling. It says everything. Prima. It says it all." We said goodbye. I put the phone down on the stone, screen down. Liam wrapped his arm around me, pulling my head onto his shoulder. The acoustic music was long gone. The laughter was a faint, happy echo. There was only the sound of the wind in the olive trees, a sound that had been here for 100 years and would be here for 100 more. The morning after was not a recovery. It was a revelation. I woke to the sound of birds, a complex, liquid symphony unlike any I had ever heard. The sun was already streaming, thick and golden, through the old imperfect glass of the bedroom window, painting a bright square on the terracotta floor. The villa was quiet, but it was a living quiet. It was the sound of a house breathing, a house that had seen parties and departures for 500 years and was unbothered. I slipped out of bed, leaving Liam in the deep, peaceful sleep of a man who had danced with his new, 80-year-old tia-in-law until 2 a.m. Downstairs, the terrazzo was immaculate. The long table was gone. The strings of lights were gone. The glasses and plates and bottles of Brunello had vanished. Signor Rinaldi and his team were not just caretakers. They were ghosts, and they had erased the evidence, leaving only the scent of time and the memory. I made coffee in the kitchen, a strong, dark espresso from the mocha pot on the stove, and took it to the terrace. I sat on the low stone wall, the same wall where I had planned it all, and looked out at the valley. The sun was warm, the air was clean, and the world felt new, settled. I had, for one beautiful night, forgotten about the phone. I had left it on the kitchen counter, dark and silent. Now, with the coffee in my hand, I retrieved it, not with the old, Pavlovian anxiety, but with the dispassionate curiosity of a CEO checking a data point. I pressed the power button. The screen lit up, and with it, the deluge. But it was not the frantic, real-time buzzing of the night before. It was the digital wreckage, missed calls, text messages, and one new, red icon. A voicemail. Of course, a text would not have been enough. A text was not a performance. My mother, Diana, needed her voice to be heard. She needed to perform her wound. I was not afraid. I was not angry. I was just done. I put the phone on the stone wall beside me, the coffee cup in my other hand. I pressed the play icon. I put it on speaker. Her voice, recorded hours ago, in the cold, early morning light of Rhode Island, ripped into the perfect, warm Tuscan air. It was not the voice of sadness. It was not the voice of a mother worried about her daughter. It was the sound of pure, undiluted, narcissistic rage. It was tight, high, and shaking with a fury that was almost impressive in its voltage. "Serenity, I don't know what you thought you were doing. I don't even know what game you thought you were playing." I took a sip of coffee. It was dark, strong, and perfectly bitter. "But you humiliated us. You humiliated this entire family." A pause, for a shaky theatrical breath. "You made your father and me a laughingstock, in front of everyone, all our friends, David's family. They just, you did this cruel, selfish thing." Her voice broke. "On schedule? You have always been difficult. You have always been so cold. But this is, I hope you're happy. I truly hope you are happy with what you've done. You've ruined your sisters. You've ruined everything. The message ended. A small click. The silence of the valley rushed back in, shocked, as if the stones of the villa themselves were repulsed by the noise. I took another sip of coffee. I looked at the dark, silent screen. "That," said a voice from the doorway, "is quite the review." Liam was standing there, his hair messy from sleep, a white shirt unbuttoned over linen pants. He was smiling, but his eyes were watchful. "My mother," I said, and my own voice was calm. I found I had no reaction. The message had landed on scar tissue. "She's upset. She says I humiliated her." Liam walked over, barefoot, and sat on the wall beside me. He took the small espresso cup from my hand and took a sip, then handed it back. "And what do you say?" I looked out at the rolling hills, the lines of cypress, the perfect, unbothered composition of it all. "I say," I said, "that I just showed everyone the real picture. They just didn't like the frame." Liam put his arm around me, and I leaned into him. We sat there for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, in the perfect, shared silence. And then, inevitably, the phone rang. It was not a new number. It was not a text. It was her. My mother. Calling back. She must have gotten the digital notification, the one that said, "Your voicemail has been listened to." She had tasted blood. She was calling back for the confrontation. She was calling back for the fight. I looked at the screen, at the name Mom, pulsing with light. I felt the old, ancient, tired reflex, the urge to answer, the urge to manage, the urge to defend, the urge to be the stable one. Liam saw my face. He put his hand on the phone, a gentle pressure. "You don't," he said, "have to do this anymore." I was about to press silence. I was about to throw the thing into the rosemary bushes. "Who is it?" A new voice, Abuela Lucinda. She had emerged from the villa, dressed, her hair pinned up, a cup of tea in her hand. She looked, as always, as if she had been awake for hours, absorbing the world. She walked over, her steps silent on the stone. I held up the phone. The screen was still pulsing. "Mom." Lucinda's eyes, sharp as a bird's, took in the name. They took in my face. They took in Liam's protective stance. She did not ask what the voicemail had said. She did not need to. She had been watching this play for 80 years. She put her tea down. She held out her hand. "Mija," she said, her voice a command. "Give it to me." I was so surprised. I just did. I handed my grandmother the phone. She looked at the screen. She pressed the green answer button. She did not put it on speaker. She just held it to her ear, her back as straight as a cypress. "Diana," she said. Her voice was not a question. It was a statement, a full stop. I could hear the tinny, frantic, microscopic shriek from the earpiece. My mother. Her rage doubled. Her script ready, now unleashed on this new, unexpected audience. Lucinda did not flinch. She just listened. She let my mother, 9 time zones away, empty her lungs into the Tuscan air. She waited, her eyes on the distant hills, for a full 30 seconds. And then she spoke. "Diana, Kalate." "Stop. Shut up." The tinny shrieking stopped. It stopped, as if a switch had been thrown. Lucinda's voice was not loud. It was low, cold, and it carried the weight of a century. "You will not," she said, her English perfect and clipped. "Speak to me, and you will not speak to her. You have said enough. For her whole life, you have said enough." A small, buzzing, desperate sound from the earpiece. My mother trying to interrupt. "I understand," Lucinda said, cutting her off. "I understand that I am sitting in the most beautiful, peaceful place I have ever been. I understand that I just watched my granddaughter, the one you threw away, the one you tried to cut from the frame. I watched her marry a good, strong man. I watched her, surrounded by people who chose her, people who came. She paused, taking a breath, and I knew this was the strike. "And I understand," she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than a shout, "that you are calling because the pretty, false picture you tried to paint for everyone finally fell off the wall, and the frame, it broke." A wail. I could hear it, a tiny, pathetic, "She made us look like fools." No, Lucinda said, her voice final. "She just stood up. You spent 30 years, Diana, 30 years, making that girl small so that you could be comfortable. You taught her that her light made you dark. You made her disappear. You demanded it. And now she is standing straight. She is in her own light. And you call it cruel? You call it humiliating?" She looked at me, a quick, fierce glance, and then back at the horizon. "No, Diana, it is not cruel. It is just the truth. And it is not her fault. It is not my fault. It is not the fault of anyone at this table that the truth humiliates you." The silence on the other end was absolute. It was not a pause. It was a vacuum. It was the sound of a narrative being completely and finally obliterated. And then, a click. She had hung up. Lucinda held the phone for a moment, looking at the black screen with a sort of cold distaste. Then, as if she were handling a dead thing, she handed it back to me. "No more," she said, her voice soft now. "No more, mija." She picked up her tea. She did not say, "I'm sorry you went through that." She did not say, "Your mother is a difficult woman." She had said it all. She had closed the account. She turned and walked down the stone steps toward the garden to go and look at the herbs. I was left, standing in the silence, the phone heavy in my hand. Liam had watched the entire exchange, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated awe. He just nodded. Once, he understood. He went back inside to give me the air. I was alone. The wind picked up, the maestrale, and it carried the scent of the olive groves, that sharp, green, living smell. I looked at the terrace. The long table was gone, but the chairs were still stacked, neatly, against the villa wall, the chairs that had been filled. I thought of the empty chairs in Rhode Island. I thought of the one empty chair that was always mine, the one I was supposed to take, in the background, in the shadow. I walked over to the stack. From the pocket of my robe, I pulled out a small, simple, silk ribbon. It was blue, a deep, cornflower blue. It was the ribbon that had been tied around the box of Sienese stationery I had bought for the invitations. It was the color of the dress I had worn in the photograph, the one where I had been trimmed, a 16-year-old girl, for the sake of composition. I pulled one of the chairs from the stack, a simple, rustic, wooden chair. The chair Tia Isabella had sat in, the chair Reina had sat in, a full, present, real chair. I took the blue ribbon, and I tied it, carefully, in a small, tight knot, onto the back of it. I touched the silk, and I whispered, to the chair, to the empty space it represented, to the girl who was no longer me, for the girl who waited to be chosen. I felt a hand on my shoulder. Liam, he was back, a cup of coffee for himself in his hand. He didn't ask what the ribbon was for. He didn't ask what I had said. He just looked at the blue knot, and he knew. He stood beside me, not speaking. We just looked out at the valley, bright and clear in the morning sun. There was no mist. There was no confusion. There was only the light. "Are you at peace, Serenity?" he asked, his voice low. I thought about it. I thought about the rage that was no longer there, the knot of hurt that had finally unwound, the decades-long ache of waiting, all of it, gone, replaced by the solid feel of the stone under my feet, the warmth of the sun on my face, the man at my side, and the quiet, strong woman in the garden. I leaned my head against his shoulder. "For the first time in my life," I said, and I smiled. "Yes, I am." The days that followed were not a honeymoon. They were a restructuring. Our guests, the members of the real table, did not depart in a rush. Liam's parents stayed for 3 more days, falling into a comfortable, easy rhythm with the villa. They would take long walks, returning with bunches of wildflowers, their faces flushed with the sun, looking happier and more relaxed than I had ever seen them. Reina, my co-conspirator and historian, stayed with us, a permanent fixture on the terrace, her laptop open, acting as our digital gatekeeper to the world we had left behind. And my grandmother, Abuela Lucinda, simply was. She inhabited the house as if it had been waiting for her, as if the stones recognized her. She would spend her mornings in the garden with Giada, her afternoons reading in the library, and her evenings with a small glass of wine, simply watching the valley turn to purple. It was in this atmosphere of profound, quiet peace that the final truths, the ones that had been submerged for decades, finally surfaced. They did not arrive with a bang. They arrived like the Tuscan morning, in a slow, undeniable revealing of the light. The first secret was the one I was living in. It was morning, and the 4 of us, myself, Liam, Reina, and Lucinda, were on the terrace. Marco Ferri, the man who had officiated the wedding, had stopped by, not as an officiant, but as our friend, and, as I would learn, as our lawyer. He had a leather satchel with him. "This," he said, pulling out a thick, leather-bound document, "is the final deed, serenity, as requested by your grandmother." Lucinda just nodded, sipping her tea. Liam looked confused. "I thought this was already done, when you signed the papers before the wedding." "That was the transfer," I said, looking at Lucinda, realizing I did not know the whole story. "Abuela, what is this?" Lucinda put her cup down. "The villa is yours, mija. It was always yours, but it was not a gift. It was a test." Reina and I exchanged a look. "When I sold the farm in California," Lucinda continued, her voice steady, "the one my father built, I did not put the money in the bank. Banks are run by fools. I put it into a trust. I called it the Lucinda Trust. Your mother, Diana, knew about it. She assumed it was hers. She assumed it was Sierra's. She assumed it would pay for things, like beige weddings." A small, sharp smile from Reina. "But the trust," Lucinda said, her eyes finding mine, "had a condition. It was to be inherited, in full, by the member of my bloodline who proved they understood what wealth was for, that it is not for showing, it is for building, that it is not for buying comfort, but for securing peace." Marco Ferri gently pushed the document across the table to me. "Señora Morales," Marco said, his voice respectful, "is a very wise woman. She engaged my firm 2 years ago. We have watched, when you, Serenity, began your own quiet investments, when you began planning for your independence. Señora Morales took action." "I bought this house," Lucinda said, placing her hand on the warm stone of the terrace. "I bought this house 1 year ago, not for me. I bought it as a stage, a beautiful, empty stage. I knew your mother. I knew Sierra. I knew. The choice was coming, and I wanted to see, when you had nothing, and you had everything, who would come, who would show up for Serenity, not for the party, not for the money, not for the main event, but for you." I stared at her. The $6 million villa, the purchase, it was not my contingency plan. It was hers. "Marco," she said, nodding to him, "is the executor. He was not just our officiant, Serenity. He is the attorney who, upon my instruction, has legally certified that you have met the conditions of the trust by choosing peace over performance. The entire trust is now yours." I looked at the document, my name, my signature. It was not just a deed. It was my history. It was my inheritance, earned not by birth, but by survival. Later that afternoon, Liam and I were walking the olive groves. He was quiet, processing. "So," he said, stopping under the shade of a silver-leaf tree, "that is a lot. Your grandmother is formidable. She is the source, I said, finally understanding. And you? Are you okay? This is a new life. He looked at me, a genuine, quiet concern. You don't have to worry about Everlane. You don't have to go back. I wasn't going to, I said. He looked surprised. No? Liam, I said, taking his hand. I sold my shares in Everlane Logistics 6 months ago. His eyes widened. The shares, the ones I had built from the ground up, were worth a fortune on their own. Serenity, you never told me. I was waiting. It was my exit strategy. It wasn't about the money. It was about the logistics. My own, I used my luck, as my mother called it, and I cashed out. For this? He asked, gesturing to the villa. No, I said. This is Abuela's gift. My investment is something else. I told him about the other project, the one that was truly mine, the one I had been building in the shadows for a year, using Marco Ferri's local connections. It was not a scholarship for a university. It was a fund, the Fondo della Luce Nascosta, the Hidden Light Fund. It's a scholarship, I explained, for the local orphanages, the children who age out of the system, but it's not for academics, it's for trades, to apprentice them with people like Giada, with the Fratelli Sognanti, with the stonemasons who keep this valley alive. It's a scholarship for the unseen, for the ones who are told their work doesn't matter, because it isn't loud. He looked at me, and I had never felt more seen. He didn't say, "That's so generous." He said, "It's a table. You're building another table." The other secrets, the ones from the beige ballroom, came from Reina. She found me in the library, the one book I had taken from the plane in my lap. She was scrolling through her phone, a look of profound, archaeological satisfaction on her face. "Okay," she said, plopping onto the sofa opposite me. "The digital excavation is complete." "What did you find, Reina?" "Do you remember," she said, her voice casual, "when Tio Rafael was sick? About 3 years ago, his bladder, he needed that surgery, the one that wasn't covered." "Vaguely," I said. "I remember Mom saying the church took up a collection, that it was a miracle." Reina just stared at me. Her face was flat. "A miracle, right. I was helping Tio Rafael set up his online banking last month. He's not good with technology." She turned her phone around. It was a bank statement, a transfer, from my personal account, 3 years ago, to his. The amount was for $50,000. "I asked him about it," Reina said, her voice quiet. "He thought Diana had given it to him, from the family fund. He cried. He said, 'Diana saved my life. And all this time? You paid it. You paid $50,000. And my mother let everyone believe it was a miracle from God, or a gift from her, because it didn't fit. Did it? It didn't fit the story of cold serenity. You just let her hide it." I had no answer. It was just a logistical problem. "Reina, he needed the surgery." "Stop," she said, her voice sharp, but not unkind. "Stop calling your life logistics. You paid the bill. She took the credit. That is the story, and she's been doing it her whole life." She swiped the screen. "Exhibit B. You want to know what the real priority was? The real main event?" It was an email, a forwarded chain, from my mother, Diana, to Sierra's wedding planner. "Planner, Diana. Just confirming the front row seating. Sierra, Hector, yourself, and Mrs. Lucinda Morales." Diana's reply. "Let's actually move Mrs. Morales to row 6, maybe 7. It's an aisle seat. She's elderly. She'll appreciate being near the exit, and it keeps the front row cleaner for photographs. We need that seat for the groom's parents." I couldn't even form the words. "She didn't just crop you from the photo. Sari," Reina said, her voice like ice. "She was cropping Abuela. She was pushing the only person who sees her clearly to the back of the room. This wasn't about the groom's parents. This was about her. She wanted a front row that wouldn't judge her. The smaller pieces fell into place over the next hour. Reina had been busy. She told me about Hector, Tia Isabela. It turned out, was the executor of the other family fund, the smaller, day-to-day one. Hector, it seemed, had borrowed heavily from that fund to pay for Sierra's main event. He had done so under the assumption that the wedding gifts, the envelopes of cash from the extended family, would replenish it. But, Reina said, her grin feral, the biggest envelopes, Tia Isabela, Tio Carlos, all the cousins, we were all here, in Tuscany, we were eating peachy. Hector had not just hosted a failed party, he had defaulted on a family loan, and the main creditors had been sitting at my table. Even the Fratelli Sognanti had a story. They stopped by to pick up their equipment, and as I paid them, with a bonus that made the older brother's eyes widen, he told me, "It is a funny thing, Signora. We were so happy to play for you, especially after the other call." "What other call?" "Oh, a woman, a planner, from America. She called us 2 weeks ago. She had heard our music online. She wanted us for a wedding in Rhode Island." I just looked at him. "She offered," he said, shrugging, "double, triple, but we do not like to fly." Then she said, "It is for the main wedding, the real one. The bride's sister is having a little party in Italy, and she stole your music. We want it back." "What did you do?" "We told her," he said, smiling, "that our music belongs to the people who listen, not the people who pay. We were already booked. By you. The final secret was my own. It was late, after everyone had gone to bed. I was in the library, where Marco had left the trust documents. I found the original architectural drawings for the terrace, the ones from the 17th century. And I found my notebook, the one from the wedding. I had a list of the 26 guests. I took a small, sharp-nibbed calligraphy pen from the desk, and by each name, I drew a small, simple, perfect olive leaf. The real table. It was not just a symbol, it was now an artifact. Reina's photo, the one of the long table under the golden lights, had become a legend. It had been forwarded, saved, and shared. That week, the local community fund, my Fondo della Luce Nascosta, asked if they could use it. They were launching their first campaign. The photo ran in the local paper and online. The golden light, the long table, the faces full of laughter. There was no caption, just the name of the fund. And underneath, the campaign's new slogan, suggested by me, "Per quelli tagliati fuori?" For the ones who were cut out. It was a week later, the last of our wedding guests, our real table, had departed. Tia Isabela, Carlos, Liam's parents, they had all left, one by one, with long hugs, promises to return, and a new, quiet understanding in their eyes. Only Reina, my chronicler, remained, her laptop a permanent fixture on the kitchen's marble counter. The villa had settled back into its ancient, peaceful rhythm, but it was not empty. The long table was back, or perhaps it had never left. That evening, we were hosting our first event, not as a family, but as a foundation. The inaugural dinner for the Fondo della Luce Nascosta. The long, rustic table was set up again, in the exact same spot under the pergola. The Fratelli Sognanti were in their same corner, their simple, acoustic melodies already drifting into the valley. Giada was in the kitchen, and the air was alive with the scent of garlic and rosemary. But the guests were different. They were the apprentices, the teenagers from the local Case di Accoglienza, shy, bright-eyed, and watchful. They were the artisans, the stonemasons, the cheesemakers, the weavers. They were the people I had built the fund for. They were the hidden lights. Liam was at the end of the table, tuning his own guitar, a gift from the Dreaming Brothers. Lucinda was walking the table, a basket of freshly cut olive branches in her arm, showing the apprentices how to make small, simple centerpieces. And at the head of the table, the chair that had been mine, I had placed it, empty, The blue silk ribbon was still tied to its back, a placeholder, a memory. The sun was beginning its descent, that perfect apricot-bruised moment of crepuscolo. The first strings of lights flickered on. The guests were laughing, a soft, nervous, beautiful sound. And then I heard it. It was not the sound of the valley. It was the sound of the outside world, a sound that did not belong here. It was the sound of a small, cheap rental car, its engine whining, its tires crunching too fast on the gravel of the Strada Bianca. The music faltered, the laughter stopped. All of us, the entire table, turned to look. The car, a small, gray Fiat, skidded to a stop near the terrace. The doors opened. My mother, Diana, my father, Hector, and Sierra. They stood there, travel-worn, rumpled, and vibrating with a misplaced, frantic energy. They were an alien species, dropped into an ecosystem that did not understand them. They stared. They saw the long table. They saw the golden lights. They heard the soft guitar. They smelled the food. They saw me. Sierra saw me. I was not in silk. I was in simple linen pants and a white shirt. My hair was tied back. I was walking toward them, not in anger, but with the calm, steady pace of an owner, a hostess, of someone who was, finally, at home. Sierra's face, pale and exhausted, crumpled. The week of silence, the week of being the villain in her own story, had broken her. You're doing it again, she whispered, the words a thin, reedy accusation, tears welling in her eyes. You're still doing it. She looked past me, at the long table, at the lights, at the people. You stole my spotlight, she said, the words finally tumbling out, a child's tantrum. This was my week, and you took it all, and now you're having another party? I stopped, a few feet from her. I looked at my sister. I did not see a rival. I saw, for the first time, a small, sad, beige, empty room. I didn't steal your spotlight. Sierra, I said, and my voice was quiet. It was the quietest thing on the terrace, and it was the loudest. I just stopped letting you stand in front of my light. A sharp intake of breath, not from Sierra, from my mother. Diana pushed past her. She was a different woman from the one on the phone. The rage had burned out. All that was left was a brittle, cold, exhausted ash. But she was a performer, and this was her last scene. Light, she said, her voice a low, vicious hiss. You talk about light? After the darkness you put us through? Her hand dove into her purse, a large designer bag that looked ridiculous and out of place. She fumbled, and then she pulled it out. A cream-colored envelope. It was my invitation, the one I had sent her for the original wedding, the one I had written by hand, with the pressed olive leaf, and sealed with wax. The wax seal was unbroken. She held it up between her thumb and forefinger, as if it were a piece of evidence, a dead thing. You sent this, she said. A trap, a game. You never wanted us here. You wanted this, all of this. You wanted to humiliate us. I looked at the envelope, the invitation I had cried over, the hope I had, for one last, foolish second, held, the olive branch I had offered, which she had not even bothered to look at. I did not get angry. I did not defend. I gently took the envelope from her hand. Her skin was cold. I walked to the head of the table, to the empty chair with the blue ribbon. I placed the unopened invitation on the table, next to the notebook that held the names of the real table and the new list, the fondo. It was just an invitation. Mom, I said, not looking at her. The door was open. You, she stammered. You think you can just buy all this, buy a new family, and it makes you better than us? She did not buy it. Lucinda. She had come up beside me, her basket of olive branches in her hand. She placed it on the table, next to my unopened, returned invitation. She earned it, Lucinda said, her voice clear, for all to hear. The apprentices, the artisans, my parents. An invitation, she said, looking at Diana, is a question, a seat at the table, is a choice. She looked at my mother, at my father, at my sister, and she gestured to the long, full table. Whoever wants to sit, she said, can sit. Whoever wants to be invited. She paused, her eyes finding Diana's. Must first be willing to see. The silence was a held breath. Liam, from his end of the table, saw it all. He saw my mother's face, a mask of shattered pride. He saw my father, his eyes on the ground. He saw Sierra, weeping silently. He put his guitar on his lap, and he began to play. Not a song, just a simple, rolling, C major chord, a sound of peace, a sound to fill the void. As he played, a small breeze, the maestrale, kicked up. It moved down the table. It rustled the olive leaves, and it caught the pages of my notebook. It flipped, past the 26 names, past the dried leaf, to the new, blank pages. Sierra watched it. She watched the wind. She listened to the music. She looked at the table, full of strangers who felt more like a family than anything she had ever known. She looked at the single, empty chair, the one with the blue ribbon, the one that was so obviously mine, the one I had saved for my own ghost. And she broke. She stepped away from her parents. She looked at the stack of extra chairs Rinaldi had left by the wall. She walked over, her movements hesitant, small. She pulled one of the simple wooden chairs. It scraped on the stone. She brought it, not to the head, not near her mother, but to the very, very end of the table, near Liam. She put it down. She looked at the basket Lucinda had left. She reached in, and her hand was shaking. She pulled out a single, small olive branch. She sat in the chair, and she placed the branch on the table in front of her. She looked at me, her eyes red, her face a ruin. I want to sit, she whispered. I think I want to be here. My mother made a sound, a small, choked Sierra. But my father, Hector, who had not said a word, who had stood like a statue of stone, finally moved. He stepped forward. He put his hand on my mother's arm. Diana looked at him, ready for her ally, ready for him to join her in the attack. Diana, he said, and his voice was not a boom, it was a sigh. It was the sound of a man who had been holding his breath for 30 years. Enough. She stared at him. Stop, he said, his voice low, exhausted. Just stop. I am tired. I am so tired of keeping the peace by making my child disappear. Just look. He gestures, not at me, but at Sierra, at his daughter, who had just chosen a seat. Just look, he said again. She's happy. My mother had no words. The script was gone. The audience had left. The co-star had quit. She was alone on the stage. I watched them, all of them, my family, the broken, beautiful, beige pieces of my past. I turned my back on them. I walked to the empty chair, my chair. I touched the blue silk ribbon, the color of the dress, the color of the girl who had been trimmed. I, very carefully, with a steady hand, untied the knot. I pulled the ribbon free. I walked to the edge of the terrace, to the oldest, strongest, thickest trunk of the grapevine that held up the pergola. I took the ribbon, I tied it, in a firm, simple bow, around the living wood. It was no longer a placeholder for an empty space. It was a declaration. This space, I said, to the wind, to the valley, to the girl I used to be, is not empty, it's mine. And as the knot was tied, as if he had been waiting for that exact cue, Signor Rinaldi, standing by the main house, flipped the switch. The rest of the lights, the ones in the trees, the ones along the path, the ones that illuminated the entire, beautiful, ancient villa, buzzed to life, a flood of warm, golden, unwavering light. And the table, all of it, the apprentices, the artisans, Raina, Lucinda, Liam, and even Sierra. Sitting at the end, they saw me, framed in the light, the blue ribbon fluttering in the wind beside me, and they began to clap. It was not the small, polite applause of the wedding. It was a real, loud, joyous, thunderous sound. It was the sound of a community. It was the sound of the lights, hidden for so long, finally being seen. Lucinda came to stand beside me, her hand finding mine. She did not look at the clapping guests. She looked at her daughter, Diana, standing alone in the shadows. She looked at Sierra, crying into her hands at the end of the table. She looked at me, standing tall, the ribbon dancing in the wind. "Peace is not revenge, mija," she whispered, her voice so low, only the stones could hear. "But it has a way. It makes the people who abandoned you, finally, and in silence, listen." Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please, let me know in the comments where in the world you are listening from. I would love to connect with you and hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.